Welcome, Mark. Thanks for joining us on Resilient Hustler.
Not a problem. It's a pleasure to be here.
Just for the benefit of our viewers here, would you mind just introducing yourself and your business and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Mark Halford. I'm the owner, director of Great Green Systems Limited. We basically specialise in environmental products predominantly sold online. And within that, really, the sectors of food waste composting and water management, water bots and composters really is what we do, plus a lot of associated products around the sides of that. So we're based here in Morley in Leeds, a bit like you guys, and we've recently taken over another couple of websites. So we have a second office now out in Garforth on the outskirts of the city. So we've expanded to the huge size of 6 employees. So yeah, turnover wise, probably by the time we get to the first year end of a proper run rate, I think the business will probably be turning over 3.5 million, which we've gone from practically nothing when we took the business over. So yeah, decent. A lot of this went through obviously taking over things as well.
So, I mean, that's quite a huge turnover. So to go from, how long has it taken you from startup to get to this point? Because not everyone starting a business could achieve that kind of turnover in the first couple of years. So how long have you been doing GGS?
No, we took the business over in 2016, September 2016.
Okay.
I think the trajectory has been pretty typical for a lot of businesses. A very, very slow start. I mean, to be clear, it wasn't actually a startup. The business was actually founded in 2008. I'd had a previous existence under another name before that as well, as Green Code Limited and Operate Green Systems Limited. So that said, it was about as close to a startup as you could get because the turnover was around £100,000 a year. The business had declined massively. The owners had been trying to pass it on for quite some time, it has to be said. I think it was about the 5th time I'd spoken to them about it. All other times it was when I was director of a previous company, on an employed basis. So,
right.
And they always wanted far too much money for it. But the 5th time I'd left that company and I decided that I wanted to. In fact, I'd actually started setting up my own business in the environmental product sector anyway. And I just kind of figured it was going to be better to take over a business, no matter what kind of condition it was in at the time. It'd be better to take over an existing business with a footprint and try to develop it rather than to start absolutely from scratch. Yeah. And so to actually answer your question, it took us a long time to really step that up. That £100,000 probably became £300,000 or £400,000 by the time COVID came along. And as pretty much like a lot of businesses in our sector, COVID doubled the turnover. And I've seen that in lots of other businesses in our sector, other businesses that we've looked at, potentially acquiring. They've all shown the same kind of dynamic, really, for obvious reasons. You couldn't go to the shop and buy anything. Yeah. So online businesses became, the preference. Not that it was easy to deliver things or make things. The way people thought that we could do that better than anybody else, they were strange times. But the turnover doubled then to around about 800,000 or 900,000. It kind of stayed there. So it's actually this acquisition that's really taken it up now to a different level, and we're starting to see the benefits of that. Already, we've only had that 4 months, but it's been a bit of a game changer in terms of
So I guess when you first kind of took over Great Green Systems, and then the new acquisitions, you probably had 2 different types of challenges at those points in time, with like becoming the business owner, and then acquiring these others. So what was the challenges when you took over Great Green Systems, going from an employee to the business owner? What was the
if we went slightly further back than that, because actually taking Great Green Systems over was a bit of a relief in that it did exist, and it's something that was being created out of nothing. I think there was just a very big culture shock back in late 15, early 2016. We set up the original company, which was called Oakleaf, really with a view to the 30-year background really in this sector. I know a lot of people, and we're quite interested in a lot of countries as well. So quite interested really in setting up an import-export type of operation. And we were getting that going, but and I guess if you speak to, a lot of people, a lot of entrepreneurs, they would all tell very similar tales of you have to use your own money in the first instance. It's a big shock. Nobody's going to lend you anything. And everything became very, very magnified, for want of a better term, financially. So you could have, I don't know, finance a £10,000 order at the start of your business. Like £10,000 is probably, one of the biggest sums you can imagine.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, it's just what you've got to pay to finance an order. And I think actually, and again, I know a lot of people tell similar kinds of stories. You don't forget the assistance that you get along the way. I always remember one of the very first orders we had prior to GGS, somebody I'd been working with as a director of a previous company. He said it was about a £10,000 order, and he sent me a cheque for £10,000 in advance with the order, effectively, but just a note saying, "I thought you might appreciate this."
Statement up front.
And you don't forget those kind of
it
makes a huge difference. They really can make a huge difference, So
absolutely,
you kind of it's very, very I think day to day, week to week, month to month in those early days, and then I think you get to a point which, if you've had an employed background, as I did. I mean, I did this at 50 years old, so I'd been in work since I was 22, so I'd been used to just being on the payroll all the way through my career. And then you get to a point where you think, wow, this actually feels like a real business. We're now just, not to say that, we don't have cash flow problems. Every business had cash flow problems from time to time. But when you're kind of sending those checks for £50,000, £70,000 out, and you think, wow, this kind of come out of nowhere.
Yeah, I think
it's a nice kind of feeling to think that you've managed to get that far. I mean, I think, to answer your question, the GGS thing, having taken over a business that, although it was tiny, the footprint was something I was very familiar with. It traded largely with UK local authorities in working on e-commerce based promotional campaigns, promoting composting and water saving, something I was very familiar with. And then I guess most interestingly, the business came with two unique products with a fairly decent export footprint. And again, that was something that I was very familiar with in a previous career. So that just felt pretty normal. It was just about trying to understand where the opportunities were and how we could rationally develop the business going forwards. And
I guess the difference for you and for new startups is that initial, like you say, the spend at the upfront kind of thing, because you had a client base and a product and the manufacturing and everything, kind of the demand, I guess what you had to front up was a lot bigger than what most startups would normally have to front up.
Certainly in terms of probably the impression, because I think that's always a dilemma, I think, for startups or small businesses, is how big do you want to kind of puff yourself up? How big do you want to make yourself look?
Yeah.
Do you want to make yourself look like you're tiny because there's an interesting narrative there, or do you want to pretend that you're larger? And obviously, working with local authorities sometimes, that can be a disadvantage. They don't want to necessarily deal with an absolutely tiny company with a handful of employees. So,
and I guess the cash flow with local authorities they don't pay up front like that. Like you have to pay.
No, but they are regular payers. That was a good thing about the cash flow model.
Yes,
that we're being an e-commerce business. Really explain we work on with councils on a subsidised and unsubsidised basis. So. In certain instances, the resident pays only a very small amount of the total price and the council pays the rest. Increasingly these days, that isn't the case at all. And what we actually do is we're working marketing partnerships with councils with no subsidies, but we effectively get our money one of two ways. We either get it straight away when the resident orders, or we get some of it from the council, subsidised element if there is one at the end of the calendar month. And so it was quite a strong cash flow model in that respect. I think we were never really on the hook for, people not paying us 60, 90 days, thank goodness.
Yeah,
so
that's it.
But I mean, let's be honest. I mean, for many years, probably even now, the business was run really with the cash flow state being the most important thing, not the profit and loss. Too worried about how much profit we were making at the end of the year. We're very, very bothered about how much money we had at the bank each morning. And of course, that's eased over the 8 years.
And I think that's quite a key thing especially for startup businesses as well. Anyone starting up this, cash flow is a key thing to be on top of.
Yeah, they always tell you, when you're in larger organizations, the old cash is king kind of thing. And of course, if you're an employee, unless you're in finance, I guess, that kind of maybe goes in one ear and out the other a lot of the time because you're focused on your piece of the picture.
Yeah.
But it's when you're running your own business, that's a lesson you learn extremely quickly. You can't function. It's simple as that. It really, it conflicts, I guess, with the kind of entrepreneurial side of things. Like people who are starting their own businesses, you would hope, are full of ideas for what they want to do with the business, but you very quickly realise that
got to fund it.
You've got to fund it.
Yeah,
you've got to fund it. And it's not easy to externally fund these days. You can't just go to the bank as a startup and say, do you mind giving me 100 grand, 200 grand or whatever. It's just not an easy thing to do. There are people out there who will do that, and I think it's important to try and stay networked as well as you can, indirectly at least, if not directly, but say indirectly, and always try to maintain contacts, in the Leeds sort of business banking community, so that if a project comes along that does require that kind of funding, you've at least got or even an acquisition opportunity, then you can at least have a dialogue about it. Whereas, maybe knocking on the door of your high street bank is not going to be a success.
Yeah. I mean, you just talked about the acquisitions, and your recent acquisitions have made extremely, your forecast, your turnover, hugely. Going back to what you went through of funding up front, but using your own money for the initial takeover of GGS to the acquisitions now, do you think what you did over the takeover of GGS and what you learned from that and the funding aspects has helped you with the acquisitions, or was this a different beast altogether?
Oh, that's an interesting question. No, I'd say that's probably more linked to the more kind of corporate background that I had previously. I would say the early years of GGS was like something I'd never experienced before. It was a very, very different game. We should say there was just a window of opportunity for me because we'd sold the large company. I was direct company, and we sold the business in late 2014. I had quite a few share options, so that was kind of unexpected windfall kind of stuff, really. And then managed to negotiate a decent exit package when I decided a year after the acquisition that I didn't want to stay. So it was really I'd always wanted to do it without any real idea of what that even meant. And then all of a sudden there was a bit of an opportunity to say, well, actually, I can fund this up to a point. We've never borrowed money, so I can fund it up to a point, and critically, I don't have to pay myself for a period of time, which sounded like a great idea at the beginning, and then felt a little bit like flying a plane into the ground after a while. You sort of think, well, when's this actually going to hit the floor, And we didn't. No, I didn't pay myself out of the business, not a penny for 3 years. Wow. I was doing other work as well, consultancy work.
Yeah.
And that was another thing. I think, people are in, you have to find a way to make it work.
Yeah.
And it became pretty obvious to me that I needed to give the business more time to develop. And the way to do that really was to, use my experience and kind of sell my knowledge, I suppose, in the marketplace on other projects as well. So I was lucky enough to do that, and I was actually running another company as managing director at the same time. So kind of doing two things at the same time, which was a lot of work, but it was necessary to just give the business the breathing space. And I would, I think I would recommend to anybody that they stayed open-minded about that. I don't think there's any shame in acknowledging that to yourself. I think you see it sometimes. You watch Dragon's Den, for example. You get differences of opinion there. You get some dragons who will say you're not committed to it on a full-time basis, and then in other circumstances, you get some of them saying, no, I think it's really important that you stay earning your 70 or 80,000 pounds a year, and we'll work with you on this, and our people will help you, kind of thing. And I think I actually don't think it even matters what it is. I mean, with the benefit of hindsight, would I have gone and stacked shelves in Tesco to give the business that breathing space? Absolutely, I would. Yeah. I think it's important that people maybe have that just kind of mental freedom there to sort of think, I have to make it, I have to put food on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about being realistic for yourself, isn't it? And then making it work for yourself. But also, before you even set up and think about starting a business, be fully aware of the financial impacts that you're gonna have and what it needs. And before you go off registering and starting to class yourself as trading, that you've done your due diligence and you've worked out what you forecasting of spending and what budgets you kind of need to work out, and therefore where's that budget coming from, which up front at the very beginning isn't coming from a bank or isn't coming from anywhere else, because you've got no history of trading to support that. It comes from you in your pocket. And I think as long as people are aware of that and aware that the first few years, and chances are they may not be drawing a salary out of the business, then as long as they're open to it and then they make it work for them, then, that's half the battle.
You've got to find a way to make it work. That's the thing. I think if you're passionate about it, you've committed to the project, then making the project succeed is everything. I think that's more important than the how sometimes. And I think you just have to be open-minded about it. I think it's a lot tougher as well than people can ever imagine. I think a lot of people that you'll talk to would probably say the same thing. I think you get there's kind of an immediate upside to this I own my own business kind of thing. There's something of a glamour about it, and you always get a positive feedback from that if you tell people that. But the truth of the matter is, it's a deeply unglamorous
6 days of the week. It's not that at all. It's about
you're having to do everything. You're in the warehouse. I mean, I drove 7.5-ton trucks up and down the motorway when we needed to, because we couldn't afford to get somebody else to do it. It's just you have to do what you have to do. You have to find a cause, and that's all there is to it.
So, what was your biggest learning curve then at that point when you took over Great Green Systems?
It certainly wasn't in the business itself, because I was very familiar with the business, and I'd been involved in similar businesses previously. I think just the culture shock of everything being stripped back to the point where there is no support, and you do everything. And things that everybody has things that they're good at and things that they're terrible at and things that, maybe they're okay at. And the problem is you have to do all of them. I really, really struggle, for example, with customer service. Direct customer interface is not my thing at all. But hey, who's going to do it? Because there's nobody there. Now we do have people who can do that, of course. And that's far better. But in the first instance, and particularly the downside of the business doubling during COVID was there was an awful lot of customer service issues with people who were living in very strange times. So that was probably the most stressful period over the 8 years, far more than any, general cash flow kind of things or anything like that. Was literally dealing with 200, 300 people at a time who just wanted their stuff yesterday and couldn't understand that the factory where it's made has just had to shut down for a week because they've had a COVID outbreak, and it's the sheer number of those things that just becomes overwhelming very quickly when you're a small business.
It was quite a unique period, wasn't it? I guess
there was, I mean, some of the tales. It was crazy. I mean, I managed just right at the end of March 2020. I'd managed to persuade the factory we have our main product, the Green Johanna, made. I absolutely pleaded with them to make me one last run before they said, look, we've got to shut down with a massive COVID outbreak. And we hope to get up and running again in a couple of weeks. But I said, no, you can't. It's going to be a disaster. So, right, okay. So they made me another 1,000 Johannas. And I thought, I remember ringing my then business partner up and saying, I think we'll be all right for the next 4 or 5 weeks, something like that. Should be okay. So, yeah, that very evening I was watching a television program, and after an hour I went back to my laptop to see what was going on with the orders, because that's what happens. You're obsessed with these kind of things. And 350 orders comes through in the hour, the first hour of this 2-hour program. And what had happened was a particular council, one of our biggest partners, had unilaterally cancelled its garden waste collection scheme and told everybody to buy a Green Johanna instead.
Wow.
Without telling us. So this stock they just kind of begged for was literally disappeared in 2 days.
I mean, that's good in one way, but then it adds more pressure on to...
It creates an awful... an awful lot of difficulty.
Yeah. So going to the acquisition side then, what's been the learning curve for this new acquisition? Because I know it's been quite an absolute mental period for you.
Yes. Well, I mean, one of the real problems is the obvious immediate upscaling, an opportunity that presented itself extremely quickly and out of the blue. So it really was a case of, either do it or lose the opportunity. So we just had to, within the parameters of doing reasonable due diligence, just say yes and then learn on the job. So happily we brought staff with us, and it's certainly easier to run the business now with the group of 6 that we are than the group of 3 or 4 that we worked previously, because the workloads are more sort of compartmentalized, which has been great. But just dealing with the sheer size of it, really. Again, the cash flow stuff, it has to be financed. Again, they're e-commerce, so it's not as bad as it might be, but nonetheless, everything's scaled up again, and you really have to get to grips with that very quickly, I think. Otherwise, you can think you're doing extremely well and then find out that actually you're not. But again, the businesses are very closely aligned, so it's not really a case of it being a massive new learning curve. No. And I think in terms of future plans, I think there's a strong case for saying that we should be looking for similar opportunities. What I'd actually like to do is to put together a portfolio of environmentally related e-commerce businesses, and try and get that kind of economy of scale as we go through, because there are a lot of businesses in this sector. Some are family businesses, some are just small businesses turning over under $1 million a year, and that's a tough thing to make money out of. But what we're seeing already is that kind of upscaling is a bit of a game changer. So I think, certainly we will be on the lookout for opportunities like that going forwards. And I think they will not be quite as, closely aligned to what we currently do, because we've got probably the lion's share of that market. So but I'd like to stay broadly in the sort of environmental sector.
And from an upscaling point of view, for anyone out there thinking about their next kind of project that will help them upscale, and what advice would you give somebody who's thinking about upscaling and how to do it?
Well, I'm kind of the boring pragmatist, really. So whilst I think it's great to have vision and imagination and everything else, I would say be sure of your numbers and be realistic around your numbers. I wouldn't let any gaps in that necessarily deter me, because there are people out there, as I said earlier, who are more than happy to help or to look at funding projects. But I do think you have to be realistic about what it is you're getting yourself into, and possibly even a little bit pessimistic, really, because it can be very, very difficult.
Yeah.
People get carried away with the ideas, I think, sometimes, rather than the reality, and that's it needs to be a bit of both. Needs to be a bit of both.
Yeah.
People who are into this kind of startup entrepreneurship kind of thing are almost by definition optimists, I think. But otherwise, they wouldn't be mad enough to do it in the first place. But you need a
Yes, optimism and practical.
Could be great if you've got, I don't know, maybe even have that balance in a business partnership where you've got an ideas guy and you've got somebody who's a bit more down to earth, for want of a better term, or numbers driven. But sometimes that is possible.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. And you talked about the branching out, and you kind of got the lion's share of what you do now, but you want to stay within the environment. Is the environmental stuff important to you?
Yes, it's a sector I've worked in since 1990. I've worked really in many different roles, particularly within composting, which is a pretty niche thing to be involved in, all the way through then. So nearly 35 years, really. So that's something that I have a keen interest in. Keen composter at home as well. I'm a big believer in the benefit. I go back to sort of 89, 90, and people saying a third of the residual waste bin, when there was only a residual waste bin because there were any recycling containers then, is organic waste, and that should be the easiest bit to get out.
Yeah,
and it's a bit of a shame that it's still a problem now, and it's not a hard thing.
What do you think the problem is?
Currently, I would say the fragmented nature of the way government goes about it. I think, really, I don't think people are necessarily anti it. So I'm in a situation where food waste collection is practiced in 25-30% of UK local authorities. The vast majority of those are in Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, because the assemblies were very, very committed to getting that done early. And you have a uniform approach there and a very, very high participation rate. So I can't believe that England is necessarily any different to the other three countries in that respect. When you get to England, it's just a very fragmented approach. And I think in the areas where food waste isn't collected, which is the majority of English councils, there's no incentive. So, I mean, food waste is collected for free in your black bin.
Yeah.
The fact that it's environmentally disadvantageous is, to an extent, neither here nor there. And then it just gets left with the enthusiasts and the people who are genuinely environmentally committed.
Yeah.
And you're not going to solve the problem solely through those people.
Yeah.
And then you're in a kind of, I guess, a situation where you have to be education-led, and you're trying to convince people that this is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And I think you have to make it easy for people. This is what I'm saying, really. Which could be just through curbside food waste collection, of course, and then consolidated processing in anaerobic digestion sites or municipal composting sites. But composting in the garden has a massive role to play.
Yeah.
And none of our food waste, literally none of it, goes in black bin. It all goes in the Green Johanna. And once you get into that mindset, it just becomes a way of life.
Yeah, so absolutely. It is just changing the mindset. And that could easily be done by just a few tweaks, just for one, starting to introduce food waste collection in throughout and all the boroughs would help.
That's supposed to be happening right across England by the end of 2026. Whether any prospective change in government might change that again, I don't know. I mean, it was supposed to be the end of 2023, and then it got put back 3 years. So who knows, really? But there was an absolute flurry of activity around the sort of period 2008, probably up to about 2012, something like that, where most of the projects that exist now, or the schemes that exist now, were put in all at once. And then the last 10 years, there's been very little progress, really, and very little central government funding for composting, which is a pity. There's a big decline in councils being able to afford to support schemes. which has made us, we've had to be, over those 8 years, far more innovative about the way that we go to markets. And now what we try to do is to work in really more in marketing partnerships with councils than if you went back, not necessarily only the 8 years, but if I went back into similar roles 15, 20, 25 years ago, you were basically trying to get the subsidy funding, really, because there was so much of it around that the campaigns almost drove themselves at that point in time. Huge amounts of central government funding going to individual councils to run composting schemes. So you were seeing sort of budget composters being sold for as little as £4 and £6 to the consumer, whereas now that's likely to be 35 to 40 million, which is not a similar situation at all, particularly with the current economic climate. So it's a different challenge for sure.
Yeah. And what's your kind of vision for Great Green Systems for the next 5 years and then 10 years?
I think it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm close to 60, so that's also a personal question in terms of what I want to do with it, I suppose. If you take that out of the equation, I think the next interesting question, really, and I'm sure a lot of people in my position have this thought process a lot of the time, is how big do you actually want this to be? What kind of a business do you want to run? Do you want a small, comfortable lifestyle business, for want of a better term, or do you want it to be the biggest it can possibly be and maybe try and sell it it's an appropriate opportunity? I'm possibly inevitably being a pragmatist. I'm kind of stuck in the middle there a little bit, I think, really. I don't really want to, on a personal level, necessarily develop the business to a size where it's problematical to run, because it's been a huge benefit of the last 8 years, leaving a corporate environment in just under 50, I would say, 59, to be able to have a different kind of work-life balance, not necessarily a straightforward one. I mean, I think the problem is that it's hard to switch off. I haven't really had a day off in those 8 years. I couldn't tell you, even on the morning of my son's wedding, I was on the laptop doing some work, quite out of the way of my wife, obviously, But on the other hand, you do get being your own boss clearly brings its own benefits.
Yeah.
I'm a member at Yorkshire Cricket Club, and I can stick my head out the window in the morning and go, oh, it's a lovely day, and I'll go for the first 2 sessions and work in the evening, or I'll work in the morning and I'll go this afternoon. And you don't get to do that when you're an employee. You just don't. So I would be loath to see that go. Yeah. I really would. And I think I'd probably step down before seeing that go, truth be told, one way or the other. But yeah, I mean, we're obviously ambitious for the business. So there's a lot for us still to do with our core product range in export markets, which are really underdeveloped. So we're looking to develop partnerships, particularly in Europe, actually. I mean, most of our export markets are long haul. So we sell a lot in America, a lot in Canada, South Africa, some really interesting projects in South Africa, and Australia. They will be our four biggest markets. So there's a lot to do in Europe, which we just started to do with a partner based in Holland. So, but we're doing nothing in France, we're doing nothing in Germany, we're doing nothing in Spain. There are definitely opportunities because there are big. I mean, France would be a great example. There's mandatory composting in all French households from January 1st this year. So we need to find a position inside of that. But again, you're a small business; you can't do everything. So you have to prioritise. So, and as I said. I think there's definitely an opportunity to maybe grow the 3 websites that we have in the portfolio to, I don't know, anything up to 10 or something like that. I think that would be a fairly straightforward thing to do.
Yeah.
And, you're going to have maybe 20 employees or whatever sat on the back end of that. So those are the kind of things I think we're really going to focus on in the last couple of years.
Going back to when you first bought and took over GGS, And you just touched on I guess, hinting at retirement and the plans for you personally. Did you have that in mind when you took over, like preparing for your own personal future and your retirement, I guess, and making sure you were looking after, because everyone, when they start a business, don't necessarily realize that they have to make sure they've got money going into their national insurance and
all that stuff,
all that kind of stuff, the boring stuff.
The personal boring.
The personal boring stuff, but also the planning ahead for your own personal retirement.
Not really. No.
Just as well things panned out the way they did.
I think I went into it with just the single thought that I'd always wanted to run my own business. I didn't even know why I wanted to run my own business.
Okay.
And it was one of those things I think I said a few times to Julie, my wife, that is, I wouldn't want to retire having not done it.
Right.
So what I saw was some kind of opportunity to do it without, as I say, not much of an idea of what we were going to do in the beginning, other than an inevitability that it would be something around the waste and recycling sector, because that's where I'd always worked.
Right. Okay.
And no, it's been very what's the word for it? I don't know. Iterative. It's just things have just kind of panned out the way they've panned out. But I do have a bit of a personal philosophy that life is a bit like that. I've kind of said to the kids, it's just kind of, it sound too corny, but it's a bit like a game of snakes and ladders, really. There are plenty of snakes around, that's for sure. What you've got to do is recognise the ladders and climb up them. And I don't think you can overthink it, really.
Yeah.
Being too planned in that, or structured in that kind of thought process is, I don't think it's helpful. I really don't. I can really almost just sit there, some loose ideas about the way I see the business going. But if you told me 6 months ago that this is what we'd be doing now, I would have been amazed. You've just got to see the opportunities when they occur, and hopefully have enough business nous to decide whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. But I think just staying open-minded really is the thing. And I think that now, I mean, I don't really, I don't have a date on when I'd like to slow down or to stop altogether or sell the business or whatever. I don't really have too many fixed thoughts on that. And what I do have is really, I suppose, a philosophy that will work itself out. Yeah, it'll become obvious in time. Yeah, what the right thing to do.
Yeah,
is.
Any regrets over the years within business that any decisions you've made that you wish you hadn't?
Oh goodness, I think we've all had plenty of those, haven't we? Yeah. But no, look, I think I'm very much of the view that all of these things are part of the learning curve. I've always tried to be a learner. I've made plenty of mistakes and some pretty big ones. And what I hope I've been is I've been arrogant around that. And sometimes you just have to step back and say, well, what went wrong there? And could I have done it better? So, no, I don't really see things like, I don't see it in those terms.
Yeah.
I see this as an opportunity to improve.
Right. Any tips, or what would be your one tip if you could give someone who was talking to you about starting up a business in the environmental sector kind of thing? What one bit of advice would you give them that they should really hold on to?
It's an interesting question. I think I touched on it earlier, really. I think you need that blend of being an ideas person. Have a great idea if you can have a great idea. I would say don't try to be too obvious and just go with the market. Look for your space, look for your strategic space, look for something original, even if it's only an angle on. We work in composting, which is a fairly generic marketplace, but we focus almost exclusively on food waste composting, and we kind of ignore most of the mainstreams. Yeah. At least in the traditional Great Green system. Yeah. There's so much in the business we've taken over now. So we have a different dialogue with councils to other companies in the market. Try and make it distinctive. Try and make it different. But I would say always know your numbers, because that's what's going to work.
I guess what you've done is really focused on your value proposition, isn't it? Really targeted the composting side and know the insides out and really focus.
Yes. I've been very resistant within the business to too much, what I would say, I call sort of generic diversification, if you like. It's very easy to spill over into general garden products and that kind of thing. It's a very crowded space, both in terms of bricks and mortar businesses and online as well. So I've been pretty key. I have a very, very keen eye for what I think works for our business and what doesn't. And actually, that's been a bit of a feature of the process, the journey we've been on in the businesses that we've taken over, is trying to sort of weed some of that out, really, and say, well, this just doesn't fit what this business should be doing. And then trying to find more of what we should be doing, you know, and that's really a case of, I think, trying to put yourself in the position of your customers. What are they looking for? We have a reasonable understanding demographically of what those people are. I mean, they're typically over 50. They're typically relatively well off, typically have reasonable sized gardens and have a certain view of the world. So it's about trying to sort of get into their heads, but I think just give them what they want. Every business is trying to do it.
Absolutely. So lastly, Mark, before you go, do you want to tell people where they can find Great Green System products?
Well, we have 3 websites. The Great Green Systems website is www.greatgreensystems.com. And then we have 2 other websites, evengreener.com and getcomposting.com. And we are predominantly an online business, so that is the best place to find us and what we do. We're not really findable in your B&Qs or anywhere like that. We're very much an online business.
Great. Well, thanks for coming, Mark.
Not a problem.
Great
pleasure.
See you.
Okay.